All right, hello. Thank you everyone for joining us back at the biotech track today. We're excited to have you all here. I hope you guys started the morning with us at our Trends in Life Sciences Investing panel. The rest of the panels today are taking deeper dives into topics in biotech innovation. And right now we have our Cardiometabolic panel. Our moderator is Saif, Rathore, and I'll have him introduce the panelists.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join what we hope is an enjoyable panel on the Panacea of modern-day killers, the future of cardiometabolic R&D. I'm really pleased today to be joined by Ania Jastreboff, a full professor of medicine here at the Yale School of Medicine, also a co-founder of therapeutics, Nadia Ahmad from Eli Lilly and Company, Daniel Legg from Boehringer, Steven Squinto from JP Morgan, Life Sciences Private Capital, and Stilz from Novo Nordisk. So I think we have a good sense of why this topic has come back up. And as someone who's spent 25 plus years involved in the space, it's great to see CV and more importantly, a broader field of cardiometabolic getting attention again. I guess one of the things I'd love to get your thoughts on from the different vantage points you each sit in is how our understanding of cardiometabolic disease is evolving. We have newer therapies. We recognize the fact that we are fundamentally dealing with a multifactorial disease that goes across some of what we had previously seen as silos. AHA has recently endorsed this idea of CKM. You know, I know Daniel, this has been a theme that Boehringer has certainly leaned into, so maybe we'll start with you. How do you see this broader view of CKM and the future of what cardiometabolic disease may be?
So let's start first. If you want to understand the next 10 years from what a future looks like, you look to what is causing morbidity and mortality in most of the patients in the United States. And that is driven by sugar and alcohol. We have to control both of those, primarily through anti-obesity medications and addressing that overall challenge that we have. When looking forward in the CKM space, what we see happening or hope that happens over the next 10 years, and I'm interested in the other panelists' thoughts on this one, the hope for us is seeing a change where we move from an anti-obesity medication that addresses both rapid weight loss for the first year and then maintenance, focusing more on shifting into assets that address weight loss specifically, and then those assets that treat the comorbidities or move forward maintaining that weight loss over time. And that's what we see happening in the future, that when you develop an asset to address rapid weight loss, that doesn't need, I know we've talked about this, that doesn't need cardiovascular risk reduction. That doesn't need a whole wealth of data in CKD because it should be relatively evident to everybody that weight loss is good. And if you look at the hypertension market, I'm almost done. If you look at the hypertension market, hypertension has kind of solved this in their label. And I know you probably don't look at hypertension labels as a hobby like I do, but in the hypertension space, if you get an indication of hypertension from FDA, the label says you're indicated to reduce blood pressure. Reducing blood pressure reduces the likelihood of stroke and cardiovascular outcomes. It's implied in the label for CKM diseases, for hypertension, that the weight loss is beneficial. And then what we do is focus on developing assets towards long-term maintenance, addressing all of the CKM state. And I probably exceeded my time.
No, there is no time. I'm curious. Nadia.
Sure. So I'm going to come from a perspective that's a mix of both industry and my field. So I'm an obesity medicine specialist, and I've been in pharma for 6 years in late phase development with the quote-unquote anti-obesity medications and developing those at Lilly. So I have a little bit of a different take on it in terms of developing assets for weight loss versus developing assets for the comorbidities. I think the asset you develop and what the science and the innovation is speaking to, which is what our patients are also showing us, is that there is a root cause to the majority of the chronic disease we're seeing. And that root cause is obesity, and obesity is the disease that has its own pathophysiology, the disease that has a biology that you can then pharmacologically start addressing. And so to me, I think the next 10 years or 20 years even will be shaped by these innovative therapies that are able to, if we can embrace as a society that we need to treat this disease, obesity, then the chronic burden of other diseases is going to decrease considerably if we can just embrace changing our healthcare system infrastructures, changing the mindset, understanding the disease at a societal level and as healthcare practitioners. So I sort of see it differently. Today, you see companies doing the obesity medication, using the same medication for the comorbidities, because we're at this place where we're treating everything so late. We're treating it when people have the comorbidities already. But if you start, and that's telling you that those things are related, though, right?
Yes.
So then if you start treating it earlier with those same meds, then you don't need to be doing all these other indications for whether it's HFpEF or OSA or osteoarthritis, because those diseases should decrease because you've targeted the patient earlier, right?
I'm curious, how does Novo think about this?
So, Saif, first of all, thanks for having me here. It's a real pleasure to be here on the panel and spend a day here at Yale. So I think, we saw around 2000 when the human genome was sequenced, we saw dramatic, progress regarding genetically driven diseases like cancer. And now I think, we unlocked one pathway, right, in the chronic disease space, nutrient sensing pathway. But we start now to have the tools that we can go after these more complex multifactorial diseases. And so I think we are in a place where we can much earlier diagnose, where I think we start to learn about also patient sub-segmentation. And then I also believe about, cardiometabolic diseases, chronic diseases more generally, as a systemic disease with cross-connectivity. So, of course, we could say, obesity is the starting point and also comorbidities occur from it. But there might be actually more to it. There's actually a deeper biology interconnectivity, because it may not be only the direct comorbidities which we can intercept, but there might also be places like, now studies are there in Alzheimer, we will see later this year. But clearly, what are interconnected drivers of disease, and can we understand this now to unlock this area more broadly?
Ania, you treat these patients, you develop new therapies to help in this space. How do you think about this, wearing the hat of an academic and a clinician?
I mean, I think we have to ask ourselves a very basic question. And that question is, why are we all here? Why are we all here? And I would argue we're all here because we want to improve our patients' lives and health. And not only improve their longevity, but improve how they live their life, their quality of life, how healthy they are. That's why we're here. So we have to think about, why do patients come to see us? Well, they come to see us for their weight. We call that obesity. We know that obesity is a neurometabolic disease. We also know that obesity leads to over 200 other obesity-related diseases, many of which are cardiometabolic. They are not the only sequelae of obesity. So I think we have to think about this in the terms of where we are in terms of the healthcare system, what the healthcare system would bear. I would agree with Nadia's approach that we have to focus on treating the disease, the root cause that is leading to all of these cardiometabolic diseases. And if we can treat obesity early, then hopefully within our lifetimes, we will have very few individuals who actually have those diseases. But until we get from a place where we're putting Band-Aids on diseases like type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and I'm an endocrinologist, and I'm saying treat the obesity rather than focusing on the diabetes. Until we get to this space where we're no longer putting Band-Aids on end-stage diseases, we're actually treating the root cause. That's where we need to get to.
Steve, you were obviously involved heavily in enabling companies that are starting in this space. How do you think about what this future looks like as you're thinking about investments, company building support?
Yeah, I would say thank God for GLP-1s. And the reason I say that is because as the emergence of the data around GLP-1s and the pleiotropic nature of what GLP-1s do That was all coming out right at the time I was raising our first fund at JP Morgan. And I was traveling the world raising that fund. Inevitably, no matter where I was, whether it was Asia, the Middle East, Europe, how do I get my hands on Ozempic or Mounjaro or Wegovy? Every single investor wanted to, understand how to get a hold of that drug. And I remember during the middle of that raise, I attended a JP Morgan private bank conference in Miami, and one of the speakers was Peter Attia. And Peter actually said he believes that the GLP-1s will be the first FDA-approved drug for longevity, which is sort of what you guys are all saying, right? And what I found interesting about it, I think two things. It made cardiometabolic, the area, interesting again for a while. From an investor perspective, nobody was investing, right? And now everybody wants to invest. And it sort of renewed this idea that pleiotropism is a good thing, right? You see this with bispecific antibodies hitting orthogonal pathways, GLP-1s, all the subsequent things that they do. That's fashionable again. We got away from that, and now we're back to that again. And I think, there are phenomenal drugs. They're going to be probably some of the best-selling drugs ever in the history of the industry. But as you and I were talking about earlier, they're not perfect.
No.
And there's going to be a world of new modalities to tackle obesity. And I agree with my colleagues that, the benefits of this are just remarkable.
Building on your comment, let's think about what this next generation looks like. So I think Bruce Booth yesterday posted there are about 200 current assets in the incretin space currently in development. We can make an argument about whether that's great use of capital or not, but as you think about new therapies in the space, and again, I recognize each of you comes at this from a different perspective, whether it's in industry, academia, or on the investing side, what do you think is going to distinguish the next generation of assets in this space? What is it going to be that we're going to be looking for, solving for?
You want me to start?
Please.
I think about it this way. This group probably knows more about this than I do, but I don't know the total number of patients that are projected to go on a GLP-1 drug, right? Whether it's GLP-1 or a tri-specific or one of the new ones being developed. But it's probably still a pretty small fraction of the total obese population in the world.
Yep.
I'm betting on that, right? I think I read somewhere the WHO said there's about 1 billion obese people. There's probably 2 billion if you consider the overweight as well. And these drugs, as great as they are really going to only treat a fraction of those patients. That's probably manufacturing issues, cost, reimbursement issues, the fact that there is muscle loss also. That's not a great thing. There's nausea. People don't like injecting themselves. The cold storage, or those are the issues. So I do think oral pills will be probably in the future. Drugs that can maybe affect weight loss without affecting loss of lean muscle, I think would be pretty important. Maybe less gastrointestinal issues as well. I suppose somebody's working on that, but you guys are probably all working on that. But I think that's sort of where the future of the drug development part of it is going, I think.
If I may ask just a quick follow-up before we continue. So how do you, as an investor, look at 240 potential programs and decide?
Well, I'll give another quote. I had said this to somebody earlier today. I had dinner with my former Regeneron colleague, George Yancopoulos, who still runs all the science there at the company. And this is when I was raising my first fund. And he said, I just put the whole fund into obesity. You're going to find lots of interesting assets. That's not what we're doing. But we have made, of the 11 investments I've made from the fund, we have made 2 in the obesity space. They're both unrelated to GLP-1. They're novel targets, right? And we're excited about it. So I think there's plenty to go around. I get asked this question a lot. Is it already too late? Is it already saturated? I don't think so. I mean, I think about the fact that there are 9 approved PD-1 antibodies in oncology, right? And they're all selling, right? And oncology is a fraction of the market of obesity. So I think there's a lot of room for other competitive products here.
I apologize, Uli, you were going to.
Yeah, I think, Steve is already touching on many topics. I would think, like innovation always occurs, right? Now an area has been unlocked, which nobody believed in can be unlocked 15, 20 years ago. But now an innovation journey has started. And so I would think there will be significant, continuous, maybe more smaller improvements on this known biology, incretin biology, where we will see over time better and better molecules.
I apologize for interrupting. Improvements, are you talking efficacy? Are you talking tolerability?
I talk about efficacy, scalability, maybe even more important, sustainability, because Steve is right? It's about 1 billion people today living on this planet who are obese. So these are completely different numbers than in most other areas. So how do we make medicines who are scalable to these numbers and actually be able to actually give access around the world? Then I believe there's also a benefit to be harvested over time to make longer acting agents. Yeah. So to drive compliance and convenience. So I think those are all things which I would think evolutions in the known biology, right? And then there are additional receptor systems to add to it and learn more. And then beyond that, a journey about new mechanisms, right? So for instance, could we find centrally acting mechanisms leading to less food intake, which are not nausea promoting? Could be one example. What can we add on the energy expenditure side? So how can we drive medications which leads to more general metabolic health? So I think there's a whole range of topics where I would think now we will see more innovation driven by new mechanisms, new biology. Some of this is already emerging, and probably many of us start working on it. Some of things, which I'm most excited about, we probably have not even discovered.
Yeah. Ania, how did you guys think about this as you stood up your company?
It was for State 4 Therapeutics, yes. Well, I mean, I think that novel mechanisms are really important in this space. So we do have many GLP-1 receptor agonists and many other nutrient-stimulated hormone-based therapies that we target. With State 4, we wanted to look at a novel mechanism that could potentially amplify all of the existing therapies and potentially stand as a novel therapeutic in and of itself as a monotherapy. Additionally, there's a lot of work being done, as has been mentioned, in terms of muscle, preservation of muscle while losing fat. And this has traditionally been done through myostatin and activin receptor inhibitors. And what we're looking at is a different kind of mechanism that can amplify all of the existing therapies potentially, as well as preserve lean mass. So again, I think for people there are many people who, for example, take the existing therapies and they don't respond as well. There are people who respond tremendously well. They lose 30, 40% of their weight, and there are others who don't. They don't meet target. And this is one of the things that we're working to develop in the obesity field. We're working to develop treatment targets, not saying, oh, well, you lost 5% or you lost 10% of your body weight. But what if the target was, let's say, a BMI of less than 25 and a waist to hip ratio of less than 0.5 and some other measure of health? What if that was the target? Just as in blood pressure or hypertension management, the target is less than 120/80. What if we had these targets? There's many patients who don't reach these targets when they take these therapies, and that's because there's not one type of obesity, there's many types of obesities. So with State 4, we're trying to make the existing therapies better, as well as potentially introduce a novel mechanism through PK activators to try and improve that. So if you want to learn more about that, we do have a poster today at noon, so you can learn a whole lot more about that. But to answer your main question, I think cost, access, tolerability, and novel mechanisms are the way to go. And the cost and the access, I think, could potentially be through two things. One, a lot of, obviously, agents in this space, also orals, right, in terms of access. And in terms of tolerability, novel mechanisms like the ones that we're developing. And I think that monthly agents and orals are going to really transform the space in terms of adherence and in terms of access, not only in the United States, but across the world.
Can I ask you a question? Because you make a couple of really interesting points. And I get asked this a lot from the investment side. Do you see the obesity market moving towards almost personalized medicine? In other words, I want to lose 10 pounds. I don't want to lose 30 pounds. Or I want to lose 30 pounds, but I want to do it over a longer period of time, not just in 4 weeks. You know,
Yes,
that's
such a great question, and that is what I see with
I get it asked. I get asked a lot.
Yes.
I never know the answer.
Well, I'm happy to help answer those questions. So, any patient that I see, we assess what are their goals, what are their health goals, not just what are their weight goals, but what are their health goals? Because ultimately, when we're treating obesity, the goal is to optimize health. It's not weight loss per se, it is to optimize health. The weight loss is what's going to help our patients come back and see us, but it's the optimizing health that we want. So you're absolutely right. With the older agents, we used combination therapy. And with the newer agents, I think that's what we're going to move towards is combination. But another gap that we haven't talked about is what about the people who have a BMI of 25 to 27, nothing has been explored for them, and they may already have detrimental effects on their health. And why are we letting them get to the point where they have diabetes or they have cardiometabolic disease or whatever? Why are we doing that? So we need to explore those individuals. And let's say you need to lose 10 or 15 pounds, and that moves you away from pre-diabetes to normal glycemia.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I absolutely agree. And again, I cannot stress enough, there's not one type of obesity. We're just grouping it all together because it's adiposity, it's fat. But there's multiple types of obesity, just like there's multiple types of diabetes. So we need different mechanisms to target those different types of obesities.
I think it's a really powerful insight, and it's a conversation we often have with others in the space, which is there will not be one ring to rule them all.
Yeah.
You know, this is not a statin, right? And I think that's really powerful as we sort of begin to talk about what the future looks like. I'm curious, Nadia. So, what do you see this looking like?
Yeah, so I agree with the categories that Ania stated, and others have stated things that also fall into those categories. I would add to those, though, right? So I think cost, access, efficacy is a broad one, and then tolerability. Efficacy gets into the biology of all the different obesities and trying to make sure that people are reaching the targets. We'll talk about targets in a bit again, but that is right for them, right? But there's the patient preference side of things in this field that's a little bit augmented and different from some other fields. So I think for all of pharmacotherapies, for all disease states, I think pharma generally does things in terms of preferences. Does a person want an injectable? Does a person prefer an oral? So for the oral, there's also that preference piece. Mm-hmm. But then you also get into the preference, and you said it, Ania, or someone else did too, that the patient just only wants to lose 10 pounds. Mm-hmm. The patient wants to lose. Mm-hmm. You don't see that in other places where the patient comes in and says, well, I want my A1C to be this and this, right? In between here and nothing else. I want my lipids to be a certain. This is a disease that people experience. They experience their weight and that extra mass on them. They experience the weight loss. They have their own perception of things. I think a lot will depend on how the field ends up resolving this tension between physicians really embracing the science and this as a disease and optimizing health for their patient and getting to those targets, balanced against what the patient may want physically in terms of their appearance or what their preferences is. It's a very different space from that perspective. And we're going to have to see where it pans out, and you may need different drugs that give you different things because of that patient preference piece as well. So whether that's oral, whether that's a monthly or whatever else. So I see that feeding into the innovation a bit more here than I do in other spaces.
Daniel, anything that you would add?
So the best therapy is the one that patients can take. So I agree with Dr. Jastreboff. Access and minimizing the tolerability issues are of key importance. Minimizing the up-titration steps in an asset, just to make sure that they're not going back and forth to the pharmacy, trying to figure out this up-titration, staying at a lower level. In primary care, which CRM is very primary care-y, the focus is on simplicity to the patient. And if I was to give you any guidance here, focus on assets that provide that simplicity to people with obesity. And that would be the optimal focus, minimizing the tolerability, minimizing the challenges with up-titrations. And as I mentioned earlier in the discussion, when you're in the maintenance phase, look, COGS are very important, cost of goods. And injectors, as we well know, injectors are challenging. Once monthly injection seems to be a little bit easier on the cost of goods, but an oral medication is a lot easier on the cost of goods. And that will improve the access, that should improve pricing as well. And it gives the opportunity for those patients, where I started this, more patients to have access to the therapy. And if it can also reduce the side effects, I think you really have a winner, regardless of the mechanism of action.
I just would like to add a comment to what Ania said. I actually believe this biology is very complex. There's not something like a linear connection between weight loss, right, linearly correlates with reduction in comorbidities. That's very person dependent and probably depend on genetic, epigenetic makeup, and to some extent also it's a region in the world where somebody lives and what the genetic background is. So I don't think we can correlate weight loss with comorbidity impact in a linear way. I also don't believe that we could make a prediction and a new molecule will behave in a certain way. Molecules have turned out to be, it's their own entities which drive biology, even if you believe it's the same receptor system, because it can be impacted by tissue distribution, how it's distributed in the brain, in what regions in the brain. So it's a fairly complex undertaking. But what I do believe is an important stream of research. How can we actually get to disease-modifying agents, which, from all what I see, we actually don't have. We certainly don't have it in diabetes. Yeah. All the agents we have now to lower glucose, by and large, are symptomatic treatments. Yeah. But they don't hold. The disease keeps progressing, and at the end, most type 2 diabetics will need insulin because the system more and more derails and fails. And I believe also in obesity, what I see so far, jury is still out, we don't have yet a disease modifier. Most likely this is more longer-term treatment, but it's not that we can actually stop it.
Right, but Uli, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
But is that because of the way we're studying it and the populations that we're studying? It goes, to me, part of it and we have to have the data to show this, though, is that you're just treating these patients so late. Like even the trials and what is supposed to be per regulatory guidance, the population of the trial, 27 and above with comorbidities, 30 and above. Is that too late? To Ania's earlier point, shouldn't we be seeing patients that are early in disease, however that's labeled? I think there's a lot of strange terminology out there right now, preclinical obesity, pre-obesity. I mean, it's excess adiposity that puts you at risk for something, right? And if we can understand that risk better and then treat those patients earlier, then we may have a chance at disease modification. I just think we're too late in the game.
Will that happen, though? I mean, now that there's been, I guess I'll call it significant exposure to GLP-1s, safety databases are building. Do you think the FDA would approve of a study on an earlier population or a less obese population? I mean,
I think they would be open. You have to. I do think the bar is probably like demonstrating that you're impacting something clinically meaningful when you treat that population. So it's not, you can't just do a study where you do whatever, 23 and above with excess adiposity or 25 and above, and just show weight reduction, right? I think you have to show more than that. Even for the populations we have now, you have to show cardiometabolic risk factor improvement, right? So I think the onus is really on, I think, the industry and the scientific community and the clinical community to demonstrate that it's important to treat these patients and present the data. And if you present data that shows it, then I think the agency would have to approve it. And I think they would be open to that.
So yeah. I have a slightly different perspective. At least twice a week, I'm on the phone with someone who runs benefits for a self-insured company. And they're trying to justify, they're like, I can't pay for this. I can't pay for this for people with BMIs over 30 who have diabetes. And I guess one question is, to your point, because I agree with you, like, look, many of us have hats as scientists, physicians, and the like. What we want to do is help people. Mm-hmm. But have we done a good job telling our value story? right? I mean, we've got people excited because they look good, but we certainly have pleiotropic benefits. I think you guys get a ton of credit for what you're doing with NHS around trying to show returns with presenteeism, absenteeism, and the like. How do we tell, to Uli's point and to what Ania was saying in terms of going earlier, a better value story for this asset? This is transformational. I think we all agree that this space and the assets that are going to come, whatever they may be, are transformational, but we're not telling that story. How do we start to do that?
I mean, so one, I think it's in steps and it's going to take time. And I think we'll look back on this conversation and be like, can't believe we were having this conversation. Hopefully within our lifetimes, that's the hope. If we start to take the steps to do this, so for example, we did a study and it was 3 years of tirzepatide and it prevented diabetes in people who had pre-diabetes. It had a 94% risk reduction. If you look at the absolute numbers, 99% of people nearly did not develop diabetes if they were taking tirzepatide. I mean, within just a 3-year trial. So that was amazing. And that's, a preventive trial. We need longer trials that actually look at that, but we're treating too late. We are treating too late to see the actual benefit. And the other problem, and you know this better than I, is that at least within the United States, people stay on a certain insurance for, let's say, 3 years. So the question is, if they're always switching insurance, then is the benefit going to be seen by somebody else? And then Medicare, right?
Which will not pay for obesity medications.
Which will not pay. So then if you look at, for example, the VA is covering this. They see the writing on the wall. They see if you treat obesity, you're not going to have these downstream effects. So that's what we need. And I think that data is going to be building, but we need more of that. And ultimately, we need to be preventing obesity. Because if we can treat obesity now, then we can prevent the disease progression of things like diabetes, right? Then we won't have to think about disease modification in diabetes because we're going to prevent it. Fine. Then we have to think about, well, how do we prevent disease progression in obesity? And so if we can prevent obesity, so how do we do that? We identify the people who are already at risk for having obesity and we treat them. We treat them super early and eventually, maybe not within our lifetimes, but somebody will come up with a vaccine. I'm sure of it. I think that that's how you lost your questions. I think that's how we're going to ultimately do it. The only other thing we could do is completely transform our entire environment.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. I was hoping that you would say that one. Did you want to speak a little to this?
So, totally agree with everything. Love primary prevention. I'm in public health, working for a pharmaceutical company. The key point that I'll ask you is the key tenet of public health is you start where the patients are. When we talk to patients, what we hear is 45% of the population looks exactly like me. I can't be sick. They all look like me. I'm fine. If you take this back to the 1970s and smoking, if everybody's smoking, why do I have a disease? Why am I at risk for a disease? I don't see the issue. What we worry about is the patient's receptivity and identifying they actually have a disease.
Okay, well, I'll just say the wait list is there's no way to get in to see me.
Yeah.
There's no way. The demand is so high. The demand is so high in terms of people wanting, again, they're coming to see us for weight reduction. And I'll tell you this, or weight loss. I'll tell you this, people stop once, right? We see all these things in the news. Oh, people only stay on these medications for, 6 months or whatever. People stop once. As soon as they stop, the medicine is no longer targeting the neurobiology, what's causing them to carry extra weight, to carry extra fat. And they come right back as soon as they start gaining back the weight. So the secret weapon in obesity treatment, I think, is that people have this immediate feedback and they come back and they will only stop once. As long as, one, we as the providers understand that obesity is a disease and that's what we're treating. We are not treating weight loss. And that patients understand that it's a disease. And the onus is on us to start making that change in society so that people understand. And we are doing that. We are doing that.
At an individual HCP level, as a professional organization, as obesity specialists, and other specialists, I totally agree, Ania, but I'm gonna take my public health hat on right now too.
We're going at it.
We're going at it. And guys, we've been there already. Right? We've done this with cancer. We've done this with other diseases. We've done this with HIV. This is not the first time we have a disease epidemic in the world that's affecting humanity. So we've been there and done that. We have to ask ourselves, my God, why is it taking so long to wrap our heads around obesity? Address those biases head on, get over it, and then say, okay, how do I prevent and treat in a population? Well, I prevent by looking at the exposures that disrupt the biology that cause the disease. I don't prevent by saying, I'm sorry, eat less sugar, or eat less or move more even. And I do think the sugar is an issue, but I think sugar is from a biological standpoint. What is it doing in your system? What pathways is it changing? What resistance or dysfunction in the hypothalamus or at the level of the muscle or the liver or the fat is it causing? If we start thinking about it like we thought about smoking and cancer, smoking and heart disease, then maybe in the public health space, we'll actually be trying to do interventions that will prevent something.
But what's disappointing to me, I think a little bit, and you just kind of hinted at it, we're not changing behavior. Because as you just said, patients will come off, they'll see the weight gain, and they come running back to your office. Well, the weight's coming back, so that means they're not really changing their behavior.
Well, that's because obesity is not a disease of behavior or choice. It is a disease of biology.
But until we change that behavior, are we really going to solve the problem?
No, we have to change the behavior. I'm sorry for the early. I didn't finish my whole thought.
I'm sorry.
So no, that's okay. It was a long thought. It was a long thought, guys. So I think you prevent the disease in the people that don't have it. When we do smoking campaigns, it's so people don't get the cancer. Once they have the cancer, you have to treat.
But we don't give people drugs to prevent smoking.
No,
but you can live without nicotine. You can't live without food. Can't live without food.
But once you have the disease, once you have excess adiposity, you may have it at this reversible point, or you may have it truly when it's full-blown disease. Then you can't. It's not about behavior. Then you already got the dysfunction that caused the disease. So I think this idea has been so conflated in our society and in public health campaigns. You don't do the Move More or Move America campaign for the people who already have obesity.
Yeah.
Right? So
that's for prevention.
It's for prevention. And so we need to get our lexicon and our concepts straight. And then I do think as a society, we've been there and done that, and we can do it for this one too.
And the thing is, so when people stop taking the medications, whatever the medications were doing to re-regulate the defended fat mass, to re-regulate how much adiposity the brain thought our body should carry within this obesogenic environment, that gets reversed. Just as if somebody stops taking insulin, their blood sugars go back up. It's no different. And that's where there's this disconnect. So when patients ask me, because it's one of the most common questions, I lost the weight, can I stop the medicine, right? So when patients ask me that, I said, how about this? Let's decrease the dose, right? Let's go down on the dose by 1 step and come back and see me in 3 months. If in 3 months they come back and they've gained no weight back, they're doing great, and they're not fighting, right? They're not using their prefrontal cortex to control every morsel of food that they're putting in their mouth, then I'm like, fine, let's try and decrease the dose again and see what happens. That has happened in like less than a handful of my patients. If a patient comes back in 3 months and they're like, you know what, I'm super struggling and I've gained back 5 pounds and I'm monitoring every morsel of food that I'm eating and I'm exercising every day and it's just not working. I said, it's okay, it's your biology, let's go back up on the dose and see how you do. So that's a way to mitigate that. And all my patients, before they start taking the medicine, during that first visit, we have this entire educational session that I give that basically says, look, this is biology. This is not something that you chose. This is how the medications work. And we describe all that so they anticipate, they know what's coming. And so when they ask me, well, can I stop the medicine? They're like, I know you said I shouldn't, but can we talk about it? And I'm like, sure, of course we can talk about it. So it's all in the framing. And the onus is going to be on primary care. Yeah. So what we need to do is start in the medical schools, start in all of the healthcare, all the healthcare provider education programs, and really start to educate about that so that we ourselves understand that, as we're also reaching out to the public and really kind of changing the entire culture of shame and blame to one that is understanding of the biology of the disease.
I agree with that, but what concerns me a little bit, I mean, isn't the problem really broader? You still walk into a supermarket, you got a row of soda, you've got Twinkies.
Yes, absolutely.
That's the issue.
Absolutely.
Yes, we have to do both.
But we are, so we have this amazing, very individualistic society. We elevate the individual in our society. I think that's wonderful. But the negative of that is that for even things like this, we say, oh, it's your behavior. You're walking into the supermarket and choosing the soda. But choice is not, we all know, I think, in this room, right? That's not at the individual level. There are intentional and unintentional societal, environmental forces put in place so that the choices are made a certain way. And so, but if we keep thinking, the folks that are thinking about that on the prevention side, I really believe are so disconnected from the biology, or have been for decades, that the conversation ends up being about calories and behavior, and as opposed to it's an exposure, whether it's in the soda, and I'm not going to come down to any one food entity, but what is the exposure there, and what is it biologically doing? Yeah. Right? We have a Food and Drug Administration agency in the United States, right? When we understood cancer,
we used to.
Well, good point. So when we understood cancer, right, there's guidelines and criteria for carcinogens. I would love to see on the public health side the research drive. These are the metabolic criteria your food has to meet before you put it on the shelf.
And I'll add to this. The question, let's say, like soda and things like that, I mean, our brain loves that stuff. Like our brain was engineered to literally love fat, sugar, salt, right? So all that stuff. But let me ask you this question. So we're talking about this in the context of obesity, but the soda on the shelf. We're not like, well, let's not treat the diabetes because we got soda on our shelves. We're like, let's prevent the diabetes by not having the soda, and I'm not picking on soda, on the shelves. But at the same time, let's treat the people who already have the disease. So whenever we're asking ourselves these questions about obesity, what kind of questions are we asking ourselves about other diseases? And let's put the same framework on it, because it's no different. It's no different.
So I'm going to invoke my moderator prerogative here and try to rein us back in for a second. So would love to live in rainbows and unicorn land. Pretend we're 10 years from now, and we're all together, and we're celebrating success. And we've been successful in driving this next generation of obesity therapies or the broader cardiometabolic space. Starting with you, Uli, what does success in your mind look like 10 years from now? Is it about more assets? Is it about a value story? Is it about patient outcomes? How would you define success 10 years from now?
I think it will be many of those things, right? So first of all, on the population levels, that we actually see improved population health. Then I would hope we also will see improved healthy lifespan as part of this. So I think that would be really important. Then also, that we keep evolving those molecules that there is broad access. And then that we drive more broadly more integrated care, right? And then I would think that we also work towards more deeply understanding this disease biology, that at some point we can get to preventive medicine. I personally don't agree with quite a few things I heard from Ania and Nadia, because I don't think we have a preventive medicine. We have something to treat a disease today. And all what you described, taking a patient off and taking back, that's for me reconfirming, right, that it's actually a treatment of a disease, but not a preventive medicine. So that requires that we actually understand what's the root cause, what is driving those diseases. And then can we find something, both on the diabetes side, what's driving this, derailing the system, and also in obesity, what is driving that in some humans, or many humans, we can keep our weight, so we have a body weight set point, but some can't.
I agree completely with what Uli said. In fact, it was your CEO a year ago who was interviewed, was quoted as saying he's worried that these drugs are going to exacerbate the obesity problem, because people are going to feel comfortable they can go eat that cheeseburger and have that soda, right? And we need to get at the fundamental root causes of the biology behind it, right? And so I think success 10 years from now gets back to what I was saying a little bit earlier, which is we've learned from these drugs the importance of maintaining a healthy weight, and that it somehow changes societal behavior. I think that would be a huge, that's a lot to ask for, but that would be success in my book, yeah.
Daniel.
We see obesity as a disease. We see therapies, and folks have access to the therapies when they need it. And we have public health policies that focus on the societal benefit, because you're not going to solve the challenge of people, 110 million people with obesity, with a drug or multiple drugs. You're not going to do that. You need the public health support to support the overall shift the same way that we did with smoking. So it is a bifurcated strategy, one on the public health side and then some on the actual pharma side. But thoughts? Now I'm interested in your thoughts.
No, I mean, I echo what you say. I completely agree. I don't think it's rainbows and unicorns. I really don't.
No. I apologize. What I'm trying to say is, if by rainbows and unicorns I mean success. What does success look like?
Right. So I think it is exactly what everyone's saying, that you need to embrace it as a disease in order to have that two-pronged strategy. What I think is really neat that is happening a little bit now and will continue to happen is that the innovation with these medications is going to start driving and accelerating some of that. So there is talk out, and if you read, there's a Time magazine article out on orforglipron, and it mentions this concept that the journalist put down around the food industry responding to the people on these drugs because they eat less and they eat healthier. So there's a change. Like, we've been beating that drum for how long in the obesity space to change the food industry, but they're responding to this innovation. And so that sort of intersection and reciprocated response, I think that's really neat. Something is happening there. And the same way, I think industry needs to start engaging because we are closer to the biology. So I think academia and industry is closer to the biology. We need to really get in there at the table with the folks in public health doing the prevention so we can all talk the same language. And I think if we can do that over the next 5 years, then we have a chance at what folks here are saying would be success in 10 years.
So, Ania, 10 years from now, your clinic wait list is finally cleared. What does success look like?
So I was thinking about this in terms of, and I am rainbows and unicorns kind of person. I just am. I'm an eternal optimist, and I think we will get there. I think we will get there, and conversations like this are obviously a wonderful start. But I think success would look like this. So a patient comes in to see me. Their BMI is, let's say, 26. They have a little bit of metabolic disease. They have access to the Whole Foods that is down the street that is subsidized by the government, so that is affordable for them. They are eating healthfully. They are exercising every day. We have a discussion about medications that can help them prevent in terms of their very, very early disease progression. We lay out all the choices. We pick the best one for them, whether it's oral, monthly injectable, weekly injectable, whatever it may be. I write the prescription. There is no prior authorization, and they get the medication. And then they come back to see me in 3 months, and they're doing great. That is rainbows and unicorns. I think that, will we get there in 10 years? Maybe not. But I think with all this competition, with all this demand that is coming from the patient, and I think the change will come from the patients, because they are out there and they are demanding the care that they deserve. I think we'll get there.
So please,
in a way, you are asking a crystal ball question. I just want to add one, brainstorming comment here. I think, there's also for me a question of to what extent we can connect research on aging and processes which are driving aging, and learning in this field, so that actually cardiometabolic disease doesn't become a singularity, but it's deeply connected to a broader, what are those interconnected drivers which over time, as we get older, are derailing the system and then lead to many, of these chronic diseases. So there could be, a really important learning here. And sometimes I'm getting actually inspired looking at the rare disease community, right, where we started to think, there's a point mutation, we can treat this now because we can sequence. But I think what I also see in the rare disease community now is this this notion of from a rare disease, can we go to a more common disease? Can we actually find, by these mutations which happened in some of us, can we learn about key nodal points? And so I would hope, that some of those areas, rare disease research, what we do in aging, can actually cross-talk to the cardiometabolic field, and we can learn more about these interconnected drivers.
So I wanted to actually just make sure we left time for questions. And first, thank you, panel, for a frank, freewheeling, open-ended exchange. No,
Should have warned you.
Yeah.
no, this is I think what the audience was hoping to hear. So please, ma'am.
Hi, my name's Amanda. I've been type 1 diabetic since like 1990. At diabetic camp, there were no kids with type 2 diabetes. Now, today, fast forward, and it's a different story. I assume the discussion today has been mainly related to adults, but can you talk about adolescents and maybe efforts to try to prevent type 2 diabetes in kids?
Sure. So I was trained in both adult and pediatric endocrinology. And so I think that this comes to this idea of treating early. And these medications, and everyone on the stage here can speak to this, are also, of course, being investigated in adolescents and actually in children 6 and up. And I think that gives us the opportunity to potentially treat before the disease progresses to a state where we have to maintain certain therapies. And again, there's no evidence for this, but if you think about defended fat mass or set point, by the time that we're adults, that's probably pretty much cooked. Like, we're not going to change that. And so the question is, when is that impacted? Is it in utero? Is it during adolescence? Is it during puberty? So when is the defended fat mass, and when is that set? So if we can treat earlier, then potentially could that be disease modifying? We don't know. So I think the trials that are ongoing are really going to show that. And so semaglutide is FDA approved for age 12 and above. And to your point, you didn't mention this in terms of type 1 diabetes. We do use these medications off-label. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but we do use these medications off-label in patients who have type 1 diabetes and obesity, because just as many people with type 1 diabetes have obesity as those who don't. We just, do it very carefully, monitoring everything, and just making sure, just huge improvements in blood sugars as well. So I think there's a lot of opportunities both in the type 1 diabetes space as well as treating early to potentially have disease-modifying implications. I don't know if anybody.
Ma'am, please.
My name is Keith Peterson. I used to work for Novo Nordisk, and I want to celebrate the success. Understanding that obesity is a disease that is modifiable and how impactful it is for all the other comorbidities. The design of the clinical studies was amazing. With that said, I also agree with Uli that we need to combine more than one tool in the toolbox. And I think understanding the impact of the choice of foods, which I've considered to be toxic on the shelves in the US compared to Europe. I'm a dual citizen, for full disclosure. I don't feed my kids that. And I think there's a reason why we don't have that kind of issue in my household. And then the most impactful drug, and I'm a little bit of a biohacker myself, is exercise. And I know that it's very difficult to change lifestyle, and it's also not the only thing we need to do, but it's a multifactorial system. So I have a question. Combining, that was a statement. Combining multiple drugs, because we've seen that in oncology, one drug is not going to cure cancer. Is that something anybody is thinking about? Because, that's a question.
Well, yeah, clearly that's the case. And I think you guys talked about it a little bit earlier. With the GLP-1s, as we all said, not only do you lose abdominal fat, but you lose lean muscle. So there are a number of companies, I've seen many of them, that are thinking about combining, sort of a factor that would prevent muscle loss or look at muscle gain at the same time with a GLP-1. I know that's certainly in the mix, and there's probably many others, right?
Yeah.
I would think.
Yeah.
So I'll also just say that, I think we do sort of label everything as a GLP-1 when it comes to these nutrient-stimulated hormones. That's a term that Ania has coined, so I'll use it. But they're not all right. So the GLP-1s are, and again, I credit Novo Nordisk for the first ones, but in terms of for obesity, but Saxenda and Wegovy, so semaglutide. Tirzepatide is a GIP in GLP-1.
Right. Three-headed.
Retatrutide in phase 3 trials is a GIP, GLP-1, glucagon receptor agonist. So these are single molecules, but they target more than one thing. So it's a different way of thinking about, it's not a combination drug, but it's combination mechanism. And so in addition to what you just said, Peter, about going for a completely different pathway that would be muscle-related and nutrient-stimulated, hormone-related. So I think we're already there, that companies are doing that, and we continue to think about those. And I've just mentioned the ones that Lilly of combinations, but I think everyone has them in terms of like different combinations people are trying.
Yeah.
So I think we're there, but there's so much to this regulatory system and so many different pathways that we're just at the tip of the iceberg in understanding what different pathways can be combined for complementarity and synergism. And when you look at the heterogeneity of the patient population, we have a lot to explore still.
So we've got time for one more question, ideally without a preamble. If you could just ask the question.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you guys here. And you should know that you changed many lives and you saved many lives through those medications. I'm not going to talk about the price of the medication, which is a completely different debate. It needs a lot of time.
The question, please.
The access to the medication. Recently, there has been a debate like CVS Caremark. They stopped the access for Zepbound, and they only accepting Wegovy and Ozempic, which is like on head-to-head trials. Research, Zepbound was proven to be more effective, and on doctor's note, the side effects were more tolerable. Even though, in spite of those hard scientific evidence based on real trials, CVS Caremark did not.
So that's a function of PBM rebates, which is an entirely broad set of questions that go beyond, I think, what we could speak to. So you're absolutely right. PBM rebates and the way in which you tier formularies and the like are, yes, big problem, something for us to definitely think about.
Yeah, so is there like a way to negotiate between the two companies to solve this debate? Or,
so I think here you're speaking to researchers and scientists and the folks at the company, so probably not the right panel to be answering that question.
Right to your congressperson about this topic.
Thank you, appreciate it.
So listen, this has been a fantastic session. Thank you guys for indulging very freewheeling conversation. I do believe in rainbows and unicorns, and I was actually mentioning that as an aspirational future state. My genuine hope is, thanks to the hard work of people like you, when we do come back and talk about this in 10 years, we will be talking about it in a field that has made progress. And so thank you for helping all of us understand what the art of the possible looks like, where the future is going, and how we can be part of it. So please, if you could join me in thanking our panel.